Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. You know, I've been on a lot of adventures, but I've never found the perfect JavaScript framework. Until now. Let's check out Redwood.js.
David, you don't have any audio. No one can hear you.
There was one button. There was just one button I pushed out of three. I have three buttons I have to push, and I forgot one of them. How about now? Oh, yeah. Okay, so did the video come through? Because that was the most important thing. I wanted everyone to see Rob in a bathrobe holding a pipe, and that worked out? All right. Hey, everyone. Let's get a few people up on stage. Welcome to the Redwood Partners Office Hours. This is really exciting for us. We have collaborated with over 25 different companies to build first-class integrations into Redwood. And this is our opportunity to meet them, introduce them to the community, have you meet them, we've already met them, and also just be able to get to say thank you to them all. So really fun. I'm gonna bring a few people up on stage. And first up, well, let me say how this is gonna work. This is a Zoom webinar, and everyone who comes in as an audience member will be able to chat. There's also Q&A. Feel free to use the Q&A. We can answer some questions via that. There will be a lot of partners coming and going. Each one will have a specific amount of time to focus on their company and what they're working on. With Redwood and Redwood Integrations, we're going to bring up Paul from Stripe first, but also we're going to have a lot of people come up on stage with me. We'll be watching the chat. If you are part of the Redwood core team, I want to make sure you're up on stage as well, so come join us. I'll look for you. And if you have any questions you want to ask by audio, let me know in the chat and we can do that as well. So Paul, let's make sure that you can turn on your video. Give me a second here. All panelists should be able to turn on their video. Paul, are you able to do that?
Nope, not yet.
Not yet. All right. I'm working on it. There are a lot. I like Zoom webinar a lot, but there's a lot of, as soon as I start it up, there's a lot of other buttons I have to click. So give me just a second here. Paul, thank you for joining us. And we'll make sure that you can screen share. Did you need to present?
I could do, but also thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, you bet, Paul. It's really been fun getting to work with you. I'm excited for you to share what we've been working on together. And I tell you what, and now I can't find my my video click. Why don't you go ahead and start, and I will get your video working here very soon.
Sure thing. So hi, everyone. My name is Paul Ashes. I'm a developer advocate who works at Stripe. And I have had the absolute privilege for the last couple of months to be working with the Redwood core team and some really fun stuff that's coming into the pipeline. So in case you aren't aware, Stripe is a payment processing company, or I should say payments infrastructure company. You might, oh, here we go. Hold on, video might actually work now. Hey, hello there.
Paul,
so again, hi, everyone. I'm Paul. Work at Stripe. Stripe is payments infrastructure. Basically, what that means is that we try to get developers paid as much as possible. So Stripe is all about open source as well. And for the last several months, we have been sponsoring development of Redwood.js, specifically a certain payments part of Redwood.js. And one of the really cool things we've done is we sponsored is two core members of the Redwood team, Christine van der Merwe and Dominic, have been working on an example store, which I will post the link to right now in the chat. Hold on,
yes.
everyone. There we go. So this is an open source example store that actually uses Stripe checkout in the background. But this is a wallet 100% React built by the core members of the team. It's super cool. Very happy to see this. You can actually find the code for it right here in this GitHub repo. And yeah, so this is just an example of like how to use Stripe with Redwood. It's got the full package of the working database. You can log in, log out. You can set prices and whatnot. And this is just like a taste of what can be done, I think, with Redwood and Stripe. What we're most excited about is that the next kind of stage of this is actually developing, well, Stripe is going to be sponsoring the development of a Redwood Stripe plugin, which has already started to make a bit of a headway right here by Christine van der Merwe, who again is on the Redwood core team. The plan is for hopefully over the next several months, we'll have a working plugin out there, which like Redwood is going to be very opinionated, and it should be very easy to essentially generate the views that you need and have everything going with just a couple of command line commands. So yeah, again, happy to be here and happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Paul, I couldn't have been more excited when you all reached out to me. I think it was Thor at the time, and I got an email in my inbox. And again, his name was Thor, so I didn't know who he was or if it was for real. He said, we're with Stripe Dev, and we'd be really interested to help sponsor a project for Redwood with Stripe. And would you guys be interested? I said, you can't ignore an email from Thor. So we had a meeting and gotten to meet you along the way. It's really been a pleasure to work with you. Chris is part of the core team. Dom's been helping out as well. And I love your vision for how you want to enable the developer communities, entrepreneurship, and it really fits along with everything we're trying to do. So thank you. It's really been great. Have you met Tom before?
I've not met Tom before. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Paul, how you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm super stoked and excited for you guys for a V1 launch. It's been a long time coming, but I think you guys have built something really special here.
Thank you. It has been a long time coming. I'll have to apologize. I'm in the room with my 3-year-old who was up vomiting all night. So that's why I look disheveled. Maybe distracted.
Tom, thanks. I did get that message. So we're, Paul, I think, we're on day 3 of Redwood V1 launch week. And, so we're making it, but it took a lot to get here, and some of us spent up all night. Okay, we'll get some, let me look for some questions. We could show one thing, it could be fun, is if we actually showed the repo for the example store and the README. Are you able to share your screen now?
I can, hold on, let me share.
Yeah,
there we go. So you should be able to see the example store
perfect
right now.
Oh, awesome.
The theme that we went for, let me make this a little bigger. The theme that we went for was superpowers. So I'll give you a quick demo of how this works. So let's say that I wish to purchase invisibility for the low price of $2 that's add it to my cart. I can click on the carts, click on checkout, and then assuming this has been hugged to death by everyone here. Great. So here we have the interface for Stripe checkout. This is our, again, very opinionated UI product that basically takes away the whole payment process away from your side onto a stripe.com domain, you see here. So I'm just going to fill in some stuff like test@example.com. This is the sample card. I will just put, whoops, any future date, random CVC, and my name is, of course, David Price. And it says Netherlands because that's where I am. So if I click pay, this should go through. There we go. And then I get redirected back to our Superstore telling me that I have made a purchase and that everyone's happy. Thank you. Have a super day, David Price. So this is just a quick demo. We could actually sign up. I won't go for that entire flow, but this shows us how easy it is to get like a Redwood and Stripe working. The actual code is here. This is the repo. Again, I won't go through everything, but what is nice about this repo is that Dom and Christine have done a great job of showing you exactly how to recreate this. There's a little bit of setup required because you do require some API keys and getting your instance of your Prism instance set up and stuff. But It's actually not that difficult. I did it myself. It's not pretty good. I would also like to just quick plug here is that Dom and Christine are looking for contributors. So if you are interested in showing how Redwood can create a fantastic e-commerce store, PRs are accepted. And then we have a stub for the Redwood.js Stripe. Again, make this bigger. Redwood.js Stripe plugin, which Christine's been put together. This is actually based on a work in progress proof of concept, which she built not that long ago, a little too big, which again has instructions on how to actually build this. But this should be coming hopefully in the next couple of months. Christine's hard at work with the example store. We really wanted to get that out for the V1 launch, which we did. So yeah, the next thing is basically to build out this plugin. Does that help?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And a couple, so Redwood, because it's a full stack framework, can manage a Stripe integration a little bit differently. And we wanted to make sure that we built that example store to demonstrate how Redwood's API works, how you can use webhooks. But was there anything that you, well, highlight a few things now that might be different if someone takes a look at that example store than doing what might be more of a front end focused integration with Stripe, right? Because there's a full backend here, there's a database running, there's a lot more going on than just, not just, but then because Stripe's APIs are phenomenal, than purely a front end integration.
Yeah, so this is using the checkout product, which is the easiest way to get started with Stripe, as you saw, because it's basically just a hosted UI where Stripe takes care of all the design and whatnot. But you can, of course, have that entire credit card form on your own website as well, with something called the Stripe payment element. So the next version of the example store will hopefully have that payments element, kind of showing off. So kind of showing off like how you can accept payments on your own website without actually having to redirect to a Stripe domain at any point in time. So I see Anthony Campolo is posting links to Stripe docs. Thank you very much for that.
Perfect.
But yeah, so the first future use would be to have everything on the Redwood site itself, or sorry, on your own site rather than being directed to any stripe.com domain.
Okay. Wow. That's going to be, yeah, that'll be great. Gosh, there's so much work that has been done here. So, well, we will make sure we redistribute these. We've been waiting to highlight the example store so people can follow those patterns. It's also fun to use. They did a great job on that. But what are the things next we want to make sure we highlight? You mentioned that they're going to start building a team for this project. They're looking for more collaborators. So that we want to make sure that we promote that. What else can we do to help, Paul?
Use Redwood, I would say. That'd be a great first start. I think everyone should use Redwood. Let me think. So what would
There's
be
actually
great?
a question in the chat about Stripe customer IDs being integrated with Redwood Auth, which is like a deep technical Redwood question.
Oh, that would require Dom. That's from Colin. I actually don't know. Dom, are you there? Or Paul, do you know?
I unfortunately do not know the answer to that question. I'm
Will
hoping
Stripe
Dom can
customer
save me.
IDs be integrated with Redwood Auth? Well, I guess they could, because everyone has access to their own auth.js. So
There's
yeah.
no real reason you couldn't, I would say, because customer IDs are unique, guaranteed by Stripe to be unique. So there's no reason why you couldn't use them.
Yeah, right. And everyone has access to their own, the way that Redwood Auth works, Redwood Auth has an API, so you can plug in other auth providers, but all of that can be overridden. You have a template auth.js file, and all of that could be overridden. And then of course you could, if you're connecting to your database, do what you want to do, right? So, oh man, things are going to get fun.
But just to answer your previous question about what people can do right now, will be really useful for the team that's going to be building the Stripe plugin is if you have any kind of feature request that you would like to see, please do open up an issue on the GitHub page. We can address that. If you know, just any kind of wild feature request you might have, we're still at the very beginning phases of this. So that would be super, super good to see.
Absolutely. Paul, thank you. I know you have content that you're going to be creating, walking people through the examples and how to do it. Let us know about that. We'd love to share that with our community. And something I wanted to make sure I again tell every one of our partners that we work with, like, come and be a part of the Redwood community as much as you want to. we're inviting you. Like there's often this feeling of like, I don't want to go show up in, Redwood's forums and like hawk our wares, we're a company, but we're inviting you to do that. We're excited to work with you. We want the Redwood community to know what you're doing and what you're making so they can use it. And all of that is what makes Redwood better. So please, our community, our casa is mi casa, su casa. I used to speak other language as well, but now I'm just an American. So anyway, our home is your home. Please come. Now, Paul 1, have you met Paul 2? I don't know which is which, but I did go back to back Paul here at the beginning. So I just, that would be easy for me to invite everyone on. Have you two met before?
We've not, but we're part of the same Paul hive mind, so we know each other.
Yeah, exactly. All Pauls around the world. Actually, we do have a common connection. So that strange Thor character who emailed you is actually, funnily enough, he emailed us to join Superbase, and we can't ignore a name like Thor. So he just gets whatever he wants.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
Yeah,
That's right.
can confirm.
See that it was context switching for me. I couldn't figure out, like, something was off when I saw some new videos from Thor, and I'm like, wait a second, something doesn't feel. But to me, you're all just friends, so that's good. Well, thank you, Paul. We're really excited about ongoing partnership with Stripe, and feel free. You do not have to stay on stage, but you're welcome to stay on stage as much as you want. We're going to shift over and talk a little bit more about Supabase. Help me out following conversations in the chat as well, and if there's questions there. But Paul, there might be some answers that I didn't get to. You could see over in the chat. We'll try to. Oh, there's the Q&A. See, I'm already missing the Q&A. There's just too many incoming. So everybody, help me out with the questions here. And Paul, thank you. Paul. Over to you. Let's talk about Supabase, which I remember, I think it was you just showing up in our forums, like with this new thing. You were all excited to have Redwood users give it a shot with Prisma.
Yeah.
I think that was the first time I met you, was the Redwood forums.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I don't know how I got a notification. I think someone had built it with, it might've been DT actually. David from Redwood was using Supabase as kind of the auth, because you've got this nice auth service that
It was
wrap.
Toby, actually.
Was
I
it
dropped the
Toby?
link.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And he had written how he had used Supabase and Redwood together. And of course, Supabase is largely just a Postgres database, and we do a few other things. So he had built this, and yeah, when I saw it, I thought it was very cool. So I dropped in to say hi and encourage any use and see how we could make it better. I think we've done a few changes since then that might help the Redwood community, connection poolers, and a few other things on top of the Postgres database, but still largely the same. I think we just want to have an environment in which any sort of front-end framework like Redwood will be able to thrive.
Well, I think that has been the case. Our collaboration with you, so this is one of the things I get to talk about here, and it's even being recorded, so maybe telling the world, is we have all these shared Slack channels.
Yeah.
And we're talking to you all every day. And it's just been a joy to build this in such a larger community, right? So on one hand, we have the people using Redwood, but on the other hand, we're spending our day with people that are helping make Redwood better. And I mean, my only concern about our Supabase integration was that, like, we're going to start losing core team members because they all love Supabase so much, and they're all going to start working for you. So
yeah, we've got a lot of crossover in terms of contributors, that's for sure. And it's been helpful though, right? I mean, that's kind of the beauty of open source. I mean, you can jump around and you can build these integrations in ways that you can't with, maybe more proprietary solutions. And yeah, everyone can dig through our code and create pull requests, and everyone can dig around Redwood's code, create pull requests. And now we've got these nice integrations, which is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. David Tierson. So other David, I think I'm David too. He's David 1.
Yeah.
There are lots of Davids and Pauls, but he's been such a huge fan of Supabase since the beginning. And I don't think he's on yet. He's a part of the Redwood core team. And DT, oh, there you are. Oh, he's there. You can just go audio. I don't know where you are in the world, but I'm promoting you to a panelist right now. Oh, that was good. Other core team members, raise your hand. I can see you more easily and bring you on. But DT, do you have audio? Or, I mean, come on, you and Paul, like, you are the Supabase conspirators for the Redwood side, chief schemers, and our tight integration with Supabase And all the examples we have of Supabase is really because of you, buddy.
Yeah, it's been great to work together with Supabase and to see them grow and all their new offerings. They had launch week last week, which they did some GraphQL work, which I think we're really interested to see how that can fit as part of the GraphQL server in Redwood. When the guild shows up, I'm sure they can talk about more about how the GraphQL server works, but there's some interesting things there. But I had a question for Paul, because I figured we'd ask another question. So you just had you had launch week last week, and before then you had, so for the entire lifespan of Supabase, everyone's been remote, right? You've been building remote. You've been in Singapore and in Europe and everywhere else. And this was the first time that the entire company was together, right?
Yeah, that's true.
What was that like? What was that like from starting a company where everyone's remote and then meeting up? And what do you think the future is for Supabase? Is it going to be more? What was it like?
Yeah.
What was that experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, maybe I should roll it back because there's probably a lot of Redwood people who don't know what Supabase is. Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative. We're building kind of the features of Firebase using existing open source tools. So we try to use tools which exist and make them better rather than just reinvent, some other way of doing things. So at its core, it's a Postgres database, and then we plug some extra stuff on top. So we started actually in January 2020. And that's when COVID struck, and we went through YC fully remote. We started growing the team. We're about 35 or 40 now in the core team. But for basically 2 years, I hadn't met over half of the team. We've got a few that I had met when I was traveling. And so, yeah, we did an offsite, our first one in Berlin. In Munich. Don't ask me why it was Munich. I think because Ant really likes the beers there, which turned out to be, very a great place to go for an offsite if you enjoy beers. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And the funny thing is, here we're on Zoom, and I can't tell how tall anyone is. Like, for all I know, DT is a giant. Like, he could be 7 foot. And
we
I
had
just
jokes.
can't
We're
tell.
like, we don't know if people have legs. We're like, yeah, you and I, like, we have no tall people are. Like, I've never seen anything below like here in your body.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it turns out the Supabase team is incredibly tall. Like, everyone kept turning up, and they're just taller and taller. We've got like a basketball team, basically. One dude's 6'7" or something like that. So that was very, very surprising. And we got together for the offsite for 1 week of team bonding or whatever you call it. But then actually it was really in preparation for our launch week. Like you guys are doing, we do launch weeks. We launch one thing every day for a week. So ours was last week. And we actually did a bit of a hacker house where we all got together in this place just south of Munich and coded up for a couple of weeks everything that we were shipping. We did a few live streams from the hacker house as well. Yeah. DT, your question was, what's it going to be? We're definitely going to go remote. We're very async. We kind of run our whole company like an open source organization would run itself. We're quite, laid back. You manage your own hours. People are spread out in, I think, 16 different countries now. So we just wouldn't go to a sort of office environment. It works too well for us.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how successful you can still be in coordinating by being async, but also just being connected. It's a really strange feeling, and we do the same thing in Redwood on a different scale. But you can still maintain those relationships and those connections and collaboration. And it almost feels like you've got 24 hours of workday sometimes.
Definitely. Sometimes,
yeah.
Sometimes you end up never clocking off. You can see. I don't have a 3-year-old child, and I looked disheveled. So I've just got a 3-year-old open source startup that is sort of a around-the-clock job when you're 20, like when you're fully remote. But it's a lot of fun. But I guess the question to you guys, I mean, how's the launch week going? You're midway through it. I know the pain that you can feel. How do you feel it's going, and what do you got coming up that you can share?
Ooh. I mean, I'm really enjoying it. Actually, I love getting all the, I'll let Tom jump in too. But one, like we're doing a launch week because you guys do a launch week. I mean, I'm not kidding. We're like, hey, that Supabase makes that look really fun. We should do that too. But yeah, we're really enjoying it. You know what I liked the most was getting all of the kind of PR related kind of media shuffling around things out on Monday. And it just feels frantic. You have no idea what's happening. And like it's Hacker News. And, you know, you're like, I deleted so many replies to Hacker News, but it helps. Like we did what we wanted to do in terms of people came to our tutorial, right?
Yep.
So we believe, one, we just want more people to know about Redwood because we think it's amazing. And in a world where React has been, is popular and there's a lot of awesome solutions to use React, we just really, it's been hard to communicate and get the messaging out there that there's now an integrated workflow that takes you end to end with this tool that you really enjoy, and why you would even want to check it out. So we did that. And the best way to be successful with Redwood is to start the tutorial. And the best way to be successful with the tutorial is to become a part of the community, because no one has to do this alone. That is the Redwood way. Like we collaborate, we are with you. The startups we saw demoed yesterday, half of those startups started as a single developer project in the Redwood community. I mean, that's
very cool.
We help each others be successful with Redwood, and that's what makes the Redwood project be successful. And so anyway, I digress. I'm feeling the feels right now. But Monday was just an opportunity to show people, let people know about Redwood and give them a tutorial, and that happened. And then there was just all the other stuff that happened around that. So yesterday we saw 13 amazing demos. We had 2 panels. That was a highlight for me. I've been dreaming about that for 8 months. As a core team, we got to see what people have been making with these tools, and you're just like, I'd do it all again.
Nice.
Right?
Nice.
That's it. That's why we've been doing this. So, and here we are today, getting to just highlight and say thank you to people that have been with us since the beginning. Right, March of 2020, Redwood goes live, COVID hits, and we're right there with you. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I saw the launch on Hacker News. It was extremely well received. The Hacker News crowd are sometimes a fickle crowd, so it's sometimes hard to please them. But it was very well received. So yeah, it's been cool, sort of building together. I think yeah. At the same time, I remember when Redwood was starting up as well, you know, and we were following a few front-end frameworks, and it's just been going from strength to strength. So it's cool that you guys have reached this massive milestone, and I'm super excited about, doing a lot more together, hopefully.
Yeah, well, we still believe that the best way to try Supabase is to use Redwood. Right. So we think it really shines. And I have a dream of a setup command, because this is what I stay up late at night thinking about. And it's Redwood setup DB. Right. And then Supabase. And then all those things around, like, how do I set this up? How do I config? How do I get it? Just like, you know, in the magic Redwood way, it's like, oh, look, I'm using Supabase locally. Like, what else do I need to do? So, so that's what I want next. But how can we help you? How can we help Supabase? What can the community be looking forward to doing with you all to help you as well?
Yeah, well, just using it and finding sort of the sharp edges around how the integrations work. So, for example, these sort of ideas that we can get to, we're about to release an API over the next couple of months, probably in the next launch week that we have, and maybe the API can enable these sort of use cases. If these are extremely important to the community, to Redwood, then we can make that use case front and center in our next launch week and make sure that it's just got a very clean interface and a great DX. So yeah, just feel free to use Redwood and Supabase together, and by all means drop a few GitHub issues into our repo if you want to see any improvements, or of course we're open source too, so help us solve these issues. That would be also very cool.
Understood. Thank you, Paul. DT's got a question for you, and then Matthew's coming up next. So go ahead.
Not just a question. I was going to say, people should follow Supabase for the technology, but also for their memes. We try to emulate Supabase for their launch week, but also for their memes. I've tried a little bit this week to do that, but I think meme marketing is something that Superbase has definitely taken to the next level. So follow Superbase
Well,
just for the memes.
Red, Redwood stepped up with the like custom videos, and this is some next level video editing. I feel like we definitely could learn a few lessons as well. So yeah, I appreciate it. If you want to see the memes, go on our Twitter. Don't expect anything serious there. But yeah, by all means, if that's your interest, then Twitter's the place to find it.
That's fun. Peter, let me know if you want to come up. I'm bringing over Matthew now from Serverless. So again, we're going. I wish I could hang out with all of you I want to come to Munich and hang out with you for hours. I believe Matthew, you're over in France, so we need to do Redwood Conf. Redwood
Yeah.
Conf.
Hi, David. Hi, Paul.
Paul, thank you so much. Feel free to stick around. Where in the world are you, Paul? I've
So-
never asked.
Now I'm in the French Alps. I'm just
Oh.
moving from one
Nice.
location. Yeah.
You should go visit Matthew.
Yeah, I'm not that far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah.
Thank you. Stick around as long as you would like. Peter, who is Snaplet, but Redwood core founder, and really bootstrap this project. He's in the chat as well. And Snaplet works really well with Superbase.
Definitely.
So there might be
Definitely.
questions over in the chat. But Paul, thank you. And we'll see you soon in the Slacks.
Thanks, everyone. All right. See you soon.
Matthew, thank you. Matthew from Serverless. I will let you introduce yourself, but welcome. And we're really, really excited to have Serverless as a first-class built-in deployment target for Redwood. And you've helped us make that possible.
Yeah, yes. Thank you, David. Hi, Tom. Yeah, it's been very interesting. So yeah, a bit of background. I work at Serverless on the Serverless framework, which is an open source project to deploy applications on AWS and other cloud providers, so serverless applications. And when you reached out to me a few weeks, months back, I found the idea really, really interesting about like integrating Redwood with Serverless framework and allowing Redwood users to deploy to AWS with just a few commands on AWS Lambda. I love the idea. The reason is that I've been working with serverless technologies and AWS for like a few years now, and I realize learning about all these things, hosting and everything, like I'm a developer, I learned AWS Lambda and servers because I had to. And so now I know about that. I can deploy these things and I can set up AWS stuff. But most people, they just want to create applications and they want to run them, right? And I think starting with the framework, like you have a full stack framework that solves problems for you, authentication, database, all of that stuff. And then you can choose and pick where you deploy and it's just working. I think this is a beautiful idea, honestly. So I love that idea when you reached out and I've been enjoying working together to make that happen. This is really great. So congrats on the launch, by the way. I haven't said that, but this is really great.
Hey, thank you. I need to. That's our new testimonial, everything you just said, because that's exactly part of the vision that we had for Redwood at the very beginning. Tom, I'm not sure if you have a quiet background right now, but this would be an appropriate time for you to bring up the vision of the universal deployment machine, which goes way back. That takes us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, for many years, I've thought some of the same ideas that you just said, Matthew, which is, wouldn't it be nice if you could just focus on writing the code for your application and then just hand your application off to some universal deployment machine and it just figures it all out, including the database, the front ends, the back ends, how it's all hooked together. The idea being machines should be able to figure this stuff out. Like I say what I need these characteristics, I need this level of performance from my application. And then the machine can just make that stuff happen. So I think all of these things are stepping stones along the way towards that. I think eventually we will get there. Unfortunately, today you still have to understand the characteristics of your database. Everyone's data problems are different. That's usually where the biggest differences are that I've seen, is in how you need to treat data, where it needs to be located, how you're querying it, how you need to update it, how real time does it have to be. These are all intricacies that you have to understand very deeply right now to have a truly performant application. But I think that eventually machines should be able to take care of that for us by analyzing the queries that we're doing. Or maybe I just give it some hints and I say, here's kind of what I want to do. Like, I don't know, you figure it out. And so it makes me wonder, like, are the databases that we have today sufficient for that? Is the difference between the way that we work with data in our applications and how we store that data in relational databases or, key value databases, like what is the match for that? And how do we navigate that into a future where we don't have to care as much about the infrastructure? So I love seeing efforts like yours that are trying to move closer to those abstractions or letting people deal with infrastructure as more as code and less as like clicking buttons, right? Because it's not reproducible. So anything that increases reproducibility, I think is amazing as far as moving towards that effort.
Yeah, that's a pretty ambitious vision. A really interesting one.
So Matthew, if people haven't used, so let me back up. Serverless.com, serverless framework, has many deploy targets you could choose, the actual infrastructure themselves. So right now with Redwood, if you'd run Redwood setup deploy serverless, you get all of the config, including a quick walkthrough to within your application. Your API will be config deploy ready for AWS Lambdas. Your web will deploy to CloudFront on AWS, and all of that will integrate with the serverless.com dashboard. And that's what you get. And I think there was a tweet just the other day that someone was like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to go through all the config to figure out how to deploy. Like I just want to build exactly what you said. And I showed them we'll just set up serverless on Redwood and that's done for you. And they're like, that's what I wanted. But there's more coming too. So that's how you would use and try serverless deploy with Redwood. But I'm not sure if you told me about the thing that's coming next that I should talk about now. Would that be a good time to highlight that there's more coming, or should I have not said what I just said because it's not quite ready?
No, that's perfectly fine. So yeah, at the moment, so a bit of background on serverless framework. And as you mentioned, serverless framework is all about deploying, at first was functions. And serverless was all about functions. So you have AWS Lambda, which is the most popular function as a service that you can find. You have function as a service on many different cloud providers, and you can deploy all of them with serverless framework. What we are thinking of right now, and Redwood is a perfect example of that, is you don't just do functions. You have, of course, to deploy resources like, I don't know, file storage or S3 buckets, if you're familiar with the AWS terms, databases, as you mentioned before with Supabase, like being able to deploy a database with just a few commands or just a line of code. And obviously the static website as well with React. So what we are looking into is how do we make that easier? How do we allow users to deploy not only functions on AWS, but also possibly databases and static websites. We've been working on the Redwood integration where there's the backend API that runs like the GraphQL API that runs on AWS Lambda. And then we have to deploy the front-end website, the React website. And for that, we have to use not Lambda, but S3 and CloudFront. I actually have a really small, can I share my screen? I think I can, let me try that. Like a really small overview of what is being deployed actually when you use Redwood and you deploy to AWS using serverless framework. You have the React frontend. So this is a slide from another talk, but I think it matches here what we have. You have the React frontend deployed on S3 and CloudFront as a CDN. And I know if you don't know AWS, these names can be intimidating. I know because I've been there, but S3 is basically file storage. CloudFront is a CDN that caches your content all over the globe. And then you have Lambda that runs your code. So this is where the GraphQL API is running. And API Gateway is basically exposing the code with a URL. It's like Apache or Nginx, but as a service. And so Redwood takes care of deploying all of that via the serverless framework. And as I mentioned, we're looking into making it easier to deploy other pieces of infrastructure like the React website with, at the moment with Lyft, which is a plugin for serverless framework. We're looking into integrating that into the serverless framework itself and adding even more infrastructure pieces like deploying, again, databases and more things. So a lot of ideas, ambitions as well, and cool projects.
Okay, yes, this gets me excited. We want to do that. This looks good. I want this chart. and let's do it with the Redwood community. So as much as you want to come and collaborate with the community, I know we're already collaborating with the core team. Maybe we create a public project for this, but this would be something we'd love to be a part of, Matthew.
Cool.
Thank you. So much more to come. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to move on. We've got Esther and Lazar from Chakra. Matthew, feel free to stick around, ask questions, but we're going all the way from infrastructure. I mean, look at this world of open source we get to play in. We're going all the way from infrastructure to front end UI. And it's been a pleasure to work with the Chakra team. I'm going to hand it over to you though to let you introduce. Thank you. And where in the world are you two right now? By the way, we're journeying around the world right now, and I love that too. Open source is so fun. Go ahead.
Yeah, man, it's everywhere. Yeah, and thank you so much for having us, man. I am in Skopje, that's North Macedonia, and Esther is in Dubai, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Congrats on the launch.
Thank you. Thanks for being a part of it with us.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was so fun working with you guys.
Yeah. Now I could just jump in. You've seen how I go. I get excited and then I talk about all kinds of things. But is there anything you want to show to start? Or I'm not sure if everyone knows how to use Chakra or what Chakra is. We do.
Yeah, I mean, I figured, you know, I can share my screen. I can talk a little bit about Chakra. I have an example ready. We can go through that.
Oh, I want to see that. Let's start
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
All right,
would love to.
Awesome. Let me just figure out how I can share my screen.
And maybe to tell people about the Chakra project, because it's it's different. You're open source as well. And
Yeah.
here you go. Dive in.
Awesome. Yeah, you can see this, right? Awesome. Right. So
Yep.
guys, if you don't know what Chakra is, it is a modular accessible component library for React. And it's super cool, right? So it's open source. It's been developed since 2018, I think, by Segun Adebayo. He's not here right now, but yeah, this is Chakra UI. So we had the opportunity to work with the Redwood team to figure out how we can bring Chakra as easy as possible into every Redwood project out there in the world, and it was just amazing. So we also have a Redwood.js integration guide on our website. You guys can all check it out, see how you can set it up. I mean, look at this, a single line. There's nothing better than that. Just do yarn Redwood setup UI, Chakra UI, and you have Chakra UI. Awesome. Yeah. So if you don't know like how Chakra works and what Chakra UI is, I have an example ready here, which we can check it out. This is basically the to-do example that I found on the Redwood examples, right? So whoever has worked with Redwood, I guess they all know this example, right? So hello from Redwood, and then we have a to-do list, right? So the idea with this example is go through the setup of integrating Chakra UI and also replacing the style components that we have from the example with Chakra UI elements, right? So let's dive in. First thing, as we saw from the website, we needed to do yarn Redwood setup UI Chakra UI. And that looks correct. Yeah, it's going to set up Chakra UI. It's going to install the Chakra UI React package, the Emotion React, because we work on top of Emotion, and also Framer Motion for animations and stuff like that. Apart from that, it's going to set up the provider for us, the Chakra provider, and also the color mode script. And that is a super cool thing you'll see later. All right, so we have Chakra UI set up right now. Let's try to do yarn Redwood dev to see the changes. There shouldn't be a lot because we still are using the style components components, but yeah, let's check it out. All right, there we go. It's dark mode because I used to test it out. So let me just clear out the storage real quick. There we go. So it's like, there we go. Awesome. All right, so where do we begin? We are going to start with the to-do control, right? The add to-do control, and that is this guy right here at the bottom. As you can see, it has the check icon. We have the input and the button for to hit submit, right? So for the sake of simplicity, I am going to copy paste everything because we don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to go through the implementation and show you guys the end result. Right, so there we go. I need to, I guess, of course, it's a live demo and crashes
Hey,
will.
but there's a pretty error page though.
Oh, it is amazing. You know, you can. All right, let's see.
Give it a refresh.
Yeah.
You are refreshing.
Awesome. Yeah, there we go. All right, so let's see what we did, right? It's pretty much the same, although the add item button, as you can see, it is a bit different, right? It's the chakra button. All right, so what we did, I imported form text field submit and use form from Redwood Forms. I did this, you know, on purpose because we had some talks on the Redwood forum from users about how to integrate Chakra UI with the Redwood Forms. So I was like, hey, this is a perfect opportunity to showcase that. And for the components, I'm using importing the button component, the input, and the horizontal stack, right? So let's see. We have the input ref, we have the form methods from the use form hook. Here's the form component that is from Redwood. We handle all of this, the submit and the form methods right here. And this is the chakra piece inside, right? So we have the horizontal stack. That means all of the children inside are going to be stacked horizontally and the alignment will happen on the center. This is how you basically do vertical centering in Chakra UI. There's the check component, and that is the imported component from locally from the project. And then we have another horizontal stack for the input and the button. I did this on purpose because I wanted to leave some space here, right? So here's the input, here's the button, and what I want you to pay attention to is the ASPROP right here, right? This input comes from Chakra UI, but in order to function really well with the Redwood forms and components, you can use the ASPROP, and what this does is basically it renders this JSX component as the text field, but it also accepts all of the styling components, style props that you can use in Chakra UI, right? And also it inherits the base style of the input, right? So we have, for example, the variant unstyled, and that's why we have nothing right here. For example, if we had something else, I don't know, let's say filled, it will look much different, right? There's a subtle gray background. When you click on it, it vanishes and stuff like that. But yeah, for this example, we want this unstyled, right? Because we have the borders at the top. And then, for example, the button component, we are using the ASPROP again as the submit, so it can trigger that functionality and also set the type to submit. So when we write hello from Redwood plus Chakra UI and hit enter, everything works smoothly, right? And we did these two things. Awesome, right? So that's how, for example, we can use Chakra components inside Redwood. I have like 3 more files to go through. So let's just do them real quick. Let's do the to-do item.js. And I guess this is the to-do item. Again, exactly, yeah. Again, we removed the styled components from the old example, the previous one, and we added the horizontal stack right here. This is an icon button for the check mark. So if you can see, there is an issue right here, but that's I guess the third file that we're going to edit. But yeah, for the check, I decided to use an icon button. There is a checkbox in Chakra UI. I don't know why I didn't use that. I felt like using an icon button, right? So yeah, this is pretty much how everything works. And for example, for the text decoration, we're just doing a ternary. If we wanted to draw a line through or not, right? So in order to fix the check icon, we need to do the check.js, and as you can see, it wraps the the actual icon with the sc.icon. We don't actually need that. We just want the icon because the icon button takes care of that itself. So there we go. Now it's centered and it's working perfectly. And for the big deal, because everyone is interested in that, we are going to go to the home page to actually put some styling on the app itself. And there we go again. All right, yeah, we need to install the icons. Sorry about that. So let's just go to the web project, do yarn add Chakra UI/icons. That is a separate package. We don't want to ship the icons with the core package, in case somebody doesn't want to use them. But yeah, for this, we're just going to add the package so it doesn't complain. Do yarn redwood def again, spin up the project, and you will see the changes, and we'll go through them. There are some interesting features in this page that I bet you guys will like. All right, so let's see. Okay, there we go. We added a little gray background. The to-do list, the title itself is changed, and there's a little icon right here that also changes the color mode, right? So let's see how that happens. There is a use color mode hook that you can import from Chakra UI /React that gives you the color mode, the current one, and the toggle color mode method that you can hook up to an icon button or a button or anything you would like. And that's what exactly happens here. We have the icon button. We just passed the toggle color mode right here. And for the icon, we're using the color mode. If it's dark, then show the sun icon, then show, if it's not, then show the moon icon. And that's how, and that's basically the dark mode in Chakra UI. It's like a one line of code. And some will say it's free dark mode, right? Awesome. All right, so let's see some more details in styling and customizability, because now we have dark modes in the app. For example, check out the background. We have the gray 500, right? That is a design token in our design system. That is the subtle gray background. I'm not sure you guys can see this from on my screen on Zoom. Not sure about the compression, but it is a very subtle background. Let me just make it 100 so you guys can see it better, right? There we go. Yeah, so that is the default background. But for dark mode, and we can set _dark, the pseudo prop, we can set the background to be gray 700, which is a darker shade of gray, right? And that's how you can basically do light mode, dark mode styling. Just you can just override the style prop in the _dark style prop on the element that you would like, right? So, but yeah, that's about it. We have also I didn't actually add any, I can notice now that I don't have any responsive styles added, but let's try something crazy live and see if we fail or not. So for example, the background, let's set the base to be gray 500, but on medium screens and up, it can be red 400, so it can be hard on the eyes. And let's see if that makes any sense. There we go. Right, so this is, for example, how you can achieve responsive design into Chakra UI as well. And this is the object notation. There's also the array syntax, where you basically, for each breakpoint, you can add any values. And you can add values for anything. It can be the padding, it can be the rounded, the background color, the width, the max width, any style prop that you can think of can be changed using, based on the breakpoint, can be changed using the responsive styles. And that's about it. This is what I had ready for you guys.
That's about it, he says. I had no idea you were going to do all that. So here's what we need, though. This future Redwood public meetup, this needs much more time for a full demo. Would you two want to come back sooner than later and show the Redwood community more of this? And by the way, yes, we're recording this for everyone. We'll be posting that so you can look through. Would you all be able to share this example project that you did with the Redwood community?
Yes, I already pushed it on my repo. I can send you guys the link. It's open. It's,
Yeah,
you know,
I'll
it's
share the
ready.
link now.
Yeah, thank you, Esther. Awesome. And yeah, that is my presentation, guys. Yeah. I have Esther to talk about our Pro product, the one that you know, keeps the light on, and also our super cool event. So I'm gonna leave everything to Esther now.
All right. Thank you, Lazar. That was a pretty cool demo for Chakra UI and Redwood. So I would say the vision at Chakra UI is mainly to ease startups and people looking to just, you know, get their project up and running immediately. So we are more or less taking the stress from creating front-end components from the scratch and just giving you components right out of the box. So that's what we are doing with Chakra UI, and we're even taking it a step further with Chakra UI Pro. So I'm just going to put a link for Chakra UI Pro right here. So with Chakra UI Pro, what we do is to give you built components for marketing sites, e-commerce sites, and even applications so that you can get started with ease immediately. And one thing about Chakra UI Pro is that it's very easy to customize. And since it's built on Chakra UI, you can switch from light to dark mode like Lazar showed us in this demo. You can easily theme it, and yeah, I would say it's so much value for your money and getting started immediately. So at Chakra UI, I would say that we have very similar vision with Redwood JS, and we are looking to even collaborate more and more with Redwood and just keep pushing the ecosystem forward. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. I was going to make a pitch for Chakra UI Pro as well. I'm glad you beat me to it. Because not only is it amazing, but we want to, that's how you, turns out you support open source projects
Exactly.
financially. And if you like Chakra UI Pro is fantastic. I told these two to come, and like, the Redwood marketplace, Redwood is a place of the people in the market that want to use Chakra UI. So please tell them about it. So
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and I'll also like to say that we're looking for contributors to Chakra UI to Redwood as well. So yeah,
always looking for contributors.
Always looking for contributors.
Augustina helped out. I'm not sure if she's on recently, but we're really looking for someone from the Redwood community to kind of play lead and point between our two communities and two projects. So we would love that and contribute back and forth. So yeah, turns out open source contributors like to help out. So we know a few. We'll send them your way.
All right, cool. Both. Thanks for having us.
We're going to move on to Joshua is from fly.io. Please feel free to stay on stage if you need to go. But thank you for the excellent demo. Look forward to more. It's really been
Thank you guys. And thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
So from front end design back to deploy, this is what we mean when we talk about Redwood, really thinking through the full end-to-end integration. Joshua, this is the first time you're my Slack friend and one of my favorites.
That's good to know. I need one of those cool mics. You got to send me one.
I'm in a garage, and if I don't do this, this actually sounds more echoey, but it's hard to hear me. It's really good to see you. I think this is the first time we've gotten to do this. That's the reason why I set this. I'm like, I'm going to force people to get on video with me so I can say hi. Joshua, thank you. You've been working relentlessly for a lot of months on fly.io support with Redwood. And I think we're almost there. You've been putting up with a few things that Redwood doesn't do as well as it needs to yet. But yeah, tell us about Fly and what's coming.
Sure. Nice to see you again, Tom.
Hey, Joshua.
So Fly, I guess, I should explain, it's a little bit different than some of the other platforms that we've been talking about today, in that we're definitely not a serverless sort of functions as a service type platform. It's definitely, at first glance, more like a traditional platform as a service where you deploy like a Docker image and it gets run in a VM somewhere. But there's a sort of key difference is what we're really focused on is being able to run your apps close to your users. So that's really what Fly is initially about. There's a lot of other things that we're trying to do as well, but it's really about running applications close to users. So that can mean a couple of things. One, it can mean just literally physically close to your users running your application if you're living in India, you can deploy it there, you can deploy it in Japan. And that's going to give you an immediate performance benefit for your application because of the speed of light. We all have to battle against that. And it doesn't matter how serverless your application is, your data has to live somewhere, and you do need to run a dynamic request against some data somewhere. So as much as all of your assets can live on a CDN somewhere, you still need to have a server somewhere, as serverless as some platforms may claim to be. So the reality of that is any platform that gives you the ability to move that data close to user in some way will give you a performance benefit, both for the front end, for the back end. So what we're really trying to sort of turn over the idea a little bit of CDN and backend being separate and putting all that stuff together, because we think that you can actually eliminate the entire CDN layer if you work intelligently enough with your backend service, so that you don't need to add all of that in your infrastructure. So, you know, we're definitely an infrastructure company. We love infrastructure details, but we are definitely aligned with the ideas behind Redwood of creating a really good developer experience, so we can eventually get to the point where a lot of this complexity is completely hidden from the developer side of things, but they still get all the benefits of things like deploying in a global environment. But one of the things that we do, apart from being able to just deploy in a specific region, like saying you want to deploy in Japan because that's where your users are, you can do that today. You can deploy your database there and your front end and back end, and everything will be running close to your users. But we also have a very unique feature which allows you to run your application in multiple regions at the same time. And that's a very simple thing to do on fly. It's literally one command line. You can just run this command and you will get your application running, and you can run it in 20 regions. All of our documentation server, everything is running in all of these regions right now. And that can be done. That's the UX that we've been focused on very heavily. So one thing that might not be obvious from that is if you're running all these application instances all around the world, what if they want to communicate with a database or Redis instance or something like that? So what we have is a private network, a private IPv6 network that's shared across this entire infrastructure. So it's an encrypted network that your application sees just like a local network. So it looks like you're just talking to another machine on a local network. So all of that stuff is discoverable through DNS. So that means that all of your instances can talk to each other. They can talk to databases, other things, all inside of your Fly organization. Automatically. You don't have to configure anything. You don't have to do VPC peering or any of the kind of stuff you might need to do in an Amazon environment. So any developer can really get this kind of thing running fairly quickly. There is a caveat to that, in that a database running in Sydney and an application server running in Japan are going to have the same kind of latency problems. But we have an experimental Postgres installation that allows you to run replicas of your Postgres database all around the world as well, which means your application would be able to use those for reads local to your users and be able to send writes only to the primary instance of that database. So this is the kind of infrastructure we've worked really hard on making work really well in Elixir and the Ruby environments. We have libraries in those environments that make this kind of thing possible. So you can just install this library and you'll automatically get all the benefits of having your replica data close to your users in all of these different regions, while still having your primary writable database in a single place. And that's the kind of thing we'd love to also make work really well with Redwood. So that's kind of a long.
I'm going to do a
technical
TLDR.
pitch.
I'm going to do a TLDR on what you just said. Genius.
Do it.
That's it. When you all first told me what you were doing, it was elegant and it's simple to handle a really complex problem. So I was really excited about it, and we're really excited to get the final. And for those who don't know, with Redwood, when we say built-in support, that means using the Redwood CLI. So Redwood setup, deploy, fly. That's what we mean for built-in. And there's a PR open for that, thanks to Joshua. We have a couple things left to iron out, but it's really close. And there are Redwood projects on Fly right now, correct? So I mean, you can deploy to Fly. We just haven't finished out the DX for the quick setup, correct?
Yeah, and right now the Fly, really most of the work is done in the Fly CLI. So you can install that today and just run Fly launch inside of a Redwood project, and it hopefully should set everything up for deployment automatically there. That will also allow you to set up a Postgres cluster and have it automatically connected to your application. It will also work with SQLite, although that can only work in one instance, one region right now, because we haven't figured out how to do distributed SQLite yet, though that's coming very soon. We're working on that.
Okay.
So
Are
that will
there
work.
docs?
Yeah.
What docs should I point people to for now? Or do we have
Yeah,
an
we
article
have
even
a-
on the Redwood forum? Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a docs page on our site, which is also linked from that PR. So if you just go to fly.docs/docs, there's a run a Redwood app. Basically just says create the app with yarn create Redwood app and run Fly launch. So most of the work there isn't much documentation already needs to go through. You can just run the Fly launch and it will guide you through picking a region to run in, if whether or not you want to deploy a database and so on. We're going to flesh that out more when we have to make it a little bit clearer of how the deployment works and how things are set up. But there's still some things that we have to iron out with getting the Docker file working and so on. But what that will basically do is install a Docker file for you and a little bit of configuration, and then everything will deploy from that point on, which is just running one deploy command.
Fantastic.
One of my dreams from the beginning of Redwood was to have Redwood apps be able to be deployed around the world, talking to some kind of a distributed database. And it's been surprisingly challenging to get going. I thought it would be easier with Lambdas and things to make that work. And it turns out we're maybe not quite ready infrastructure-wise as an industry to get there with those building blocks. But what you're doing at Fly, to me, is a totally different angle than I was thinking about, but maybe the more practical and performant way to get there right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of trade-offs. I mean, there's always going to be trade-offs when you're talking about distributed infrastructure because of that latency, because of dealing with outages in different regions. You know, these are realities of running services in the world, right? But what we want to try to make it easy possible to do is deal with those things in an elegant fashion, dealing with the fact that if a region disappears, well, everything else should still be running. You'll automatically get redirected to another one. So for now, if you're in Hong Kong and you're connecting to our Hong Kong data center and it gets put offline, you'll just get sent to the nearest one in Japan or San Francisco. Now that works already today. So a lot of these problems are already solved at the infrastructure level outside of Fly. And then once we come into the backend side, which is the part we're talking about of getting these distributed databases running, there's always this kind of trade-offs that are hard to deal with, of how you deal with these situations with truly distributed databases like Cockroach and these kind of things. So those things are definitely hard to reason about. And meanwhile, we have solutions like this one with Postgres, where the writes are only going to the primary instance, but you're sending these web requests from your local region to the primary region. So if you have your database running in Chicago, your write is actually being sent there, but then all the reads are happening from the Japan side. So this is a trade-off that adds a little bit of complexity in the setup, but it makes it a lot easier to deal with these kind of outage problems and situations where you have one part of the network that can't talk to the other. So these are things that most people wouldn't even want to think about. And hopefully over time, we'll be able to make it easier to just throw something in your application and have it work out of the box.
Well, I'm glad we have you thinking about it.
Yeah.
Here. Here. Hey, Joshua, for every late night conversation we've had, because are you in Spain? Is that correct?
Yep. 9 hours.
So thank you.
Difference.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure. And yeah, again, just blown away by the amount of time that other people have put into this project, and you're one of those, and a lot more to come. So if we do have a Redwood Conf EU, would you be there? Could we hang out?
Sure. Come on out.
I'm saying that in front of Tom, because that's our next.
Yeah.
He's like, we're not talking about Redwood Conf till we do launch week. Well, that's like, we're halfway through launch week, so it's time, right?
Oh, so we can start now?
We can start now, right?
I recommend Spain.
It's Wednesday.
There you go. It's Wednesday. Joshua, thank you. We're gonna switch over. Feel free to stick around, but it's also getting late for you. and enjoy your family this evening, because I know that as well is some late nights. But thank you so much, and
Right.
appreciate you being a part of this. So
Thanks, Clark.
from
Sure.
first class deployment, you've got to be able to make sure it's secure along the way. And Redwood put security first from end to end. And Colin at Clerk, you and your team have been helping us out with that. Colin, I think the first time we've gotten to do this video thing live as well. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see you.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, super excited to be here. This is great.
Hey, thank you. Well, tell people about Clerk if they haven't. I'm guessing a lot of people haven't heard about Clerk before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna actually just share my screen. I think it's the easiest way to show it off. We'll stay out of the code for now, but yeah, I mean, so Clerk is sign up, sign in, manage user profiles, really for Jamstack applications like Redwood. So, I mean, just quickest way to show it off is this is what you get after you sign up for Clerk. So I'll set up an application. We'll use passwords. We'll use Gmail, GitHub, and then you get to a dashboard, and you can kind of go and preview what we do for you right out of the box. This is kind of a lot like Stripe Checkout in the sense that you can redirect people to these components. It all just kind of works out of the box. We have it run through a shared OAuth credentials in development, so you can kind of be off to the races really easily. And then that's kind of the sign up, sign in side. And then we also provide a full user profile component. So, you know, this is kind of dependent on what attributes your application has configured, and you can go in the Clerk dashboard and set that up. But it comes with all like 2FA out of the box. I could sign in on another device, and then we have like remote signing people out. But yeah, then you know, adding this to Redwood, you ultimately have two options. They're both kind of documented here, but yeah, one is a redirect flow, kind of like Stripe Checkout, and the other is like everything is actually just backed by React components. So you can ultimately do sign up, sign in, user profile, and then this guy in the top right, we call this a user button. And so that's kind of our four main components. You can mount it right in the app, or you can redirect away to our hosted version. But I'll stop this. Oh, actually, one more thing before I stop the share. This has been really fun because you've had some great vendors we work with. So like if you use Supabase, we work with them. And so you can kind of hook up our auth to Supabase, and then we'll generate authentication tokens to run queries right from the front end. And then the other kind of small world thing was this dashboard is actually all in Chakra. So it's been really fun to kind of see vendors we work with as well on this live screen. But I'll stop the share from here and we can just chat.
Love it. First time I went through the DX. So someone showed up in because open source, someone shows up with a PR. Hey, I want to, here's an authentication product for Clerk. Like, I've never heard of Clerk before. And then went through your, just the setup and the DX and was blown away by the amount of authentication features that you have packed in, but the DX and the simplicity of just getting up and running for the first time. And I hadn't found that balance yet. I'd seen either really feature-rich authentication providers that were very complex to set up, or a lot of simplicity, but very limited in the features, or even, you know, some vendor lock-in for the deploy targets before. So Clerk really, Clerk was an easy thing to recommend to people because of how simple it was to get up and going. So yeah, thank you for that, because it turns out we care about DX a lot as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think, you know, kind of industry-wide, I'd say the last generation of APIs are missing an emphasis on React. And, you know, the last 5 years, everything's React. And so kind of just approaching it as, what does this front end first authentication mean? I think goes a really long way for us. And it's been really just a ton of fun working with the community and finding something that works.
Yeah, I love that approach of being able to wrap that functionality in pre-made React components that you can just insert, choose your authentication providers and go. Because I mean, if you do that on your own, that could easily take you a week or two to iron out and do like the OAuth flow with GitHub and all that. Like that stuff is not simple. And you're like, I just wanted to hack up like a little cool example, and now I got to spend 2 weeks like getting auth working to auth with GitHub or something. It's a total nightmare. So I love how easy you're making that. The one question that I always have with React-based components of this nature is how do you style them to fit your application's needs? Can you show like how that works? How I customize anything?
I want to do it at RedwoodCon, apparently. It's very much in progress. So as of right now, I'd say our solution is a little bit lackluster. So there is kind of settings in the dashboard that can customize things. And then really, if you're getting into deep customization, if you inspect the DOM of our components, you'll find that the HTML elements are like prefixed with CL dash sign up button. And so what people are doing currently is kind of updating a global CSS file to override our styles. And it's really one of the bigger pain points our customers have right now. We are very actively working on like, how can someone actually pass in a Chakra button, or how can they pass in a Tailwind string of classes that replaces kind of our default styles? And so that's V2. And, you know, hopefully by RedwoodCon, we'll have that ready and can show it off quickly.
Awesome. I know that pain. It's like, you can't do everything for version 1, right? You got to leave some things for version 2.
We tried though, Tom, we tried.
Definitely tried. Everything to be one. No, I love seeing, I mean, it's clear the path that you're on, and I have no doubt that you'll provide awesome mechanisms to do that. I love the focus on DX. Like, this is such a huge part of what we're doing at Redwood, and seeing that carry through into things like Clerk is refreshing.
Yeah, and I think we're really excited. I think, you know, Supabase came in as a customer request. Supabase, Firebase, Fauna, like any of those databases that you can query from the front end, kind of people were asking us right away for like, hey, can you generate the authorization tokens for that? And it's kind of been fun to see the way customer requests come in. It's kind of in the order of like application development. So we had, you know, people get their auth going first and like, okay, I need to talk to a database, integrate that. And now we're getting like, okay, can you make it work with Stripe? And that's what inspired my question about like, can we somehow integrate Redwood auth with Stripe customer objects? Because it, you know, it's not Stripe.charge, it's user.charge, right? You're ultimately charging some kind of entity. And so we hope that over time we can improve the DX of all of these APIs.
That's awesome. I mean, one thing that we've been noodling about is, you know, we'd like to have a sustainable business model for Redwood eventually. One thing that we've toyed with and haven't had time to explore yet is like pre-made starter packages to say like, okay, I want to use these 5 different technologies together and build me a SaaS app starter. And that's the kind of thing that I think becomes reasonable in that use case where you're like, all right, I want to use Clerk combined with Stripe, combined with Chakra and Supabase for the database, and make me a SaaS app with all of the bits like ready to go, all the normal stuff, the table stakes that everyone has to do. And then I can just start writing what makes my app special and save you like, I don't know, 3 months of time in doing that. And then charge $100 for it. Right? Like
and burn if you're a startup, right? That's like precious time.
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
not just 3 months.
That could be like $100,000 of development time or more, but you know, $250,000. Like it's, you know, you hire developers in the Bay Area, you can burn through $1 million pretty quick. So I mean, having those shortcuts to getting to where you want to go, like that's real value.
And I love this trend of API vendors of, you know, it used to literally just be Stripe.charge, and now they give you the whole checkout UX. And I think, you know, auth was very much the same way, where we're able to provide the UX. And it's really interesting to see. And I think really driven by Jamstack and React, like people are providing features as a service now, not just APIs. And I think we're still figuring out like what is even the lingo around that. What do you call that kind of business? Because it's an evolution on top of APIs. But like, yeah, absolutely love the idea of, check a few boxes and you have, whether it's a B2B SaaS, a B2C SaaS, just ready to go out of the box.
Colin, I have my own plans for this question I'm about to ask you, so it's purely leading, but how can the Redwood community continue to help Clerk on your vision and mission for next steps?
I think give it a try and let us know where you hit any pain points. That's always the biggest thing. But really, I do get very excited about kind of the line of questioning to Paul from Stripe about like, how can we make that experience really easy? Because I look at, like setting up customer objects in Stripe is just like this extra headache. And if somehow the plumbing was just done out of the box, like, I don't know, ultimately I'm most excited about like, how can we save developers time together? So anything along those lines is what we want to work on.
All right, let's do it. Well, we would love to keep collaborating with you. It's been a blast. There's so many from your team that have showed up in our PRs and our community. Keep doing it. And we'd love to keep pushing all this forward. Colin, thank you for your time. Have you met, and by the way, quick pause, we're definitely going to run over time. We have 2 more partners that are going to be coming up, and you don't want to miss them. So stick around. This will all be recorded. And so every segment that we have will be posted on our, in the timestamps on our Redwood.js YouTube/Redwood.js. So come back and check on those. And Colin, thank you. Have you met the Prisma team? Have you met Nicholas before?
I have
so speaking
not.
of naming things and not knowing what to name them, like, is Prisma an ORM? Nobody knows.
I have not met the Prisma team.
And now magically we are.
You are whatever your end users call you. Is that what happens?
That's exactly it. No, we haven't met actually, but I'm still like really like happy how kind of tight knit this entire community is. When you're talking about Thor before, who was reaching out to you when he was still at Stripe, then now he's working at Supabase. Then you had Paul on, and yesterday I was on a call with Thor, and we initiated our shared Slack channel with the Supabase team, where we also have Paul on. So it's really, you see all the same faces all over again, which is really nice.
It is so fun. Yes. And again, why we made this day a really important part of our launch week was because we wanted to knit and weave all those relationships together in a couple sessions. So Colin, thank you. Feel free to stick around. Where in the world are you? East Coast, is that correct?
East Coast, but moving to San Francisco next week. So
all right.
Well, Redwood Conf West Coast then. Well, back to back.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Prisma, the things we could say about our relationship with Prisma, because it goes way back. And I feel like Tom should do this intro, but
I can do this intro. So
yeah.
when we were first, Peter and I sat down, Peter Pistorius, and started hacking on what has become Redwood, we tried a couple of different ORMs. There were a few out there, and they were all bad. Like they just didn't, the ergonomics wasn't very good, and the way that you did relationships between them, and you'd get into like cyclical include, like require issues. And coming from Active Record and Rails in my past was just like, this is unacceptable. Like the state of the art in JavaScript ORM tooling is just like, what do you people doing? Right? We can do better than this. I know that we can do better than this. There has to be better than this. And this was critical to building Redwood. Like I wasn't going to build a web framework with a DX around dealing with the database that just wasn't good, or at least didn't look like there was a path towards becoming as good as something like Active Record had been for years. That would just be too big of a step backwards. So then I came across Prisma, And the Prisma 2, what was Prisma 2 at the time, sort of the next iteration of Prisma, and the query builder was called.
Was the very, very early days, to be honest. Like the entire website, it was still everything about Prisma 1, and Prisma 2 was this little thing that we were working on the side that only a few people knew about.
Yeah, I don't even remember how we came across it. Someone must have told me about it or something, but I started looking at it and was like, oh, all right, yeah, like this is how I would do it, right? Like if I was going to sit down and write a way to do this, like this matches more what my brain wants to do and what seems like it should be possible, and how you write the schema and how things play out. And then it's like, oh, they're working on migrations eventually, and like all the stuff that I knew needed to be there. Anyway, so that was Prisma. It was like, all right, perfect timing. It's in development, like it's super early. So maybe if we start talking to them, we can be like, oh, what about this? And what if you did this? And what, and then we could kind of like Redwood could grow and Prisma could grow, and the two could grow together and meet each other's needs. And that's really happened. And we have a very close relationship. And Nicholas, we got together in Berlin when I used to go out there all the time when I was working at Chatterbug, and it's just been so awesome. And Prisma has been so great, and you've been moving so fast. And I love it. So there's my intro. You guys are great.
That's so great to hear, and really nice that you don't regret that choice that you've made initially there. It was quite a big bet, I think, back then, because nobody kind of knew how this is going to turn out eventually. But looking at where we are now, I think in hindsight, you did like place your stakes on the right, on the right thing there.
Totally, 100%.
You know, I give credit a lot to Prisma for being the MVP, or the inciting incident for all of these JavaScript full stack applications that came about really in the last 2 years. Now, you know, the Redwood team might have found you all first and had some influence on the ultimate, design development direction. But I mean, you look at Blitz came out at the time, Remix, and all of those are leaning heavily into Prisma. And I know
it's
Redwood,
really a trend.
We would have been missing a piece if it wouldn't have been for Prisma, right? You need to talk to the database, but we wanted a deployment workflow to feel, look like, taste like a certain way. And
yeah, and since you've been mentioning like Remix and Blitz there, it's really a trend that we're seeing, that like Prisma really also like makes it even possible now for front-end developers to become full stack developers, because like all these frameworks that have a backend component and now let front-end developers write server-side code like Remix, like Next.js with API routes or server-side rendering. So like this enables front-end developers to now write backend code, but the part that often still feels intimidating to front-end developers is then that they actually have to work with a database, which feels kind of foreign, right? Especially relational databases have this weird kind of data model with foreign keys when you want to work with relations. That's just not something that front-end developers typically deal with. And I think Prisma just makes it approachable by having an intuitive way to model the data in the first place, and then also to let front-end developers query the data in a familiar way with just a very intuitive and convenient JavaScript or TypeScript API. So that's certainly a trend that we are seeing. This kind of Prisma makes front-end developers full stack all of a sudden.
Yeah, and that is it's such a great trend. Like just allowing developers, front-end developers, to creep more towards the back end, and back-end developers to creep more towards the front end. Like either way, to me, is a huge advancement, and hopefully we'll create more of those, of the developers that are both and are comfortable across both. And that is, to me, like when I find a person that is front end and back end, like I love that. That person can be so productive, they can do so much, they can live in both worlds. And the more that the technology allows people to do that, the more of those kinds of developers are going to be out there. And this is part of that.
Right, and coming back actually also to the terminology and what we call Prisma. So in the early days, indeed, we called it the query builder. Then at some point we gave in, we did call it an object relational mapper, the ORM. But actually, as of this week, we can add another attribute to it, and that is, it is now becoming also an ODM. That is an object document mapper, because as of this week, we are also supporting MongoDB in production. And I guess that means that's also another big announcement for Redwood. I don't know how often you have heard this question, whether Redwood also works with MongoDB, but it certainly has been one of the most frequently asked questions that we're getting since the initial release of Prisma. And yeah, since this week, we can finally say it's ready and Prisma can now also be used with MongoDB. And also speaking of launch weeks, like championed by Paul and Supabase, but we're also hosting a MongoDB launch week at the end of April. I can drop the link to that in the chat here as well, so that people can check it out and also join us online there. We also are planning lots of fun activities, events, also office hours. So definitely would like to see people there as well.
Yeah, we'd love to be a part of that. Agreed. I came out of the last startup I was working on before this was MeanStack, and so much of Node, the Node ecosystem grew up around Mongo, right? Meteor.js and Mongo support. That I think this is and you know what? I really like MongoDB Atlas product. I think it's a really great hosted database solution. If you want to use Mongo, and they have some serverless and serverless-like capability. But yeah, this is really big. I know you all have been working incredibly hard to get Mongo support. And yes, Redwood does work. The generators work with Mongo because of the way that Prisma works. If you want to convert an app and try Mongo, it's you have to change your ID fields and the type there, but that's about it. I remember the first time I converted over and it took me 10 minutes. Which is another amazing thing about Redwood. When you integrate everything, you want to try a different auth provider, you just set up the new auth provider and your whole API is the same. You want to try a different database with Prisma, swap out a few fields, change the database target, and boom, you're running your whole stack against Mongo if you just want to give it a shot. So really fun. Well done. Well done. And Nicholas, I'm going to invite the guild up, because if technically we're officially out of time, you can stick around.
That's all right.
But you are going to, this isn't ask, but kind of a tell. I would love to have you come and present more on Prisma and all of this at a future Redwood public meetup, and do a demo, highlight more with Prisma. We get those questions all the time, and I don't think people know everything you can do with Prisma in the context of Redwood, and would love to just have you show them and record it for
I would love to do that. Always
So-
happy to chat with you folks.
Yeah, thank you. For all the years now of relationship with Prisma, but also with you, it's just really been a pleasure to work with you all. And I can't say enough good things about the whole team, but every time we get to interact a little, I just get a little warm and fuzzy at times. I'm like, I like those guys. These are the people. This is why we do this.
I can definitely return that compliment, David. Always fun to work with you. And I also enjoy always looking at our shared Slack channel, see what kind of discussions are going on there. So great to work with you.
And not always so serious and productive, but always a good time. So, well, thank you. I think you might have some questions in the chat. Feel free to stick around. I know we're going to go over time now, but Nicholas, thank you.
All right.
Look forward
Thank
to
you.
more. And
Thanks,
look forward to
Nicholas.
your Mongo launch week. Doten. Okay, who do I need to invite up right now? I'm trying to find people. Hey, if you're supposed to be up here with the guild right now, would you raise your hand as an attendee, and that way I can bring you up, because there's a few of you. Is Uri here, or did we miss him?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Uri is here, but Lauren and I are here. I think Sahaj is also around, maybe Camille. I'm not sure, actually. I just can't. Oh, now I can see the list of participants. Great.
Yeah, who else are we missing? Okay, raise your hand. I'm trying to find names, and not everyone's name is the same, but you two, well.
Yeah, we can start.
Yeah, you start. Let's just say Redwood API has been pleasantly hijacked by the guild, and we are so much more better for it. And that's my intro. It's just been a blast. Go ahead.
Cool, thanks. So I can start with just a quick overview of the guild and what we're doing. The guild is basically a group of open source developers. We are working together on open source projects and mainly around APIs, specifically around GraphQL, but not only. We're doing a lot of other stuff. we have this cycle of like doing open source and then working with companies to help them with open source. And then that feeds back into the work that we're doing with open source. So it's like a cycle that always feeds itself, and we're seeing a lot of use cases and a lot of interesting takes on different pieces of technology. So that's super interesting for us. And I think this is what makes us a great group of amazing people who likes working together and challenge each other. And this is so much fun for us. The Guild is also a group of, it's a part of the GraphQL Foundation. We joined a few years ago, and right now we're working and maintaining and helping with projects like GraphQL.js, the GraphQL spec. We took over some parts of the maintenance of GraphQL. And recently we started maintaining Data Loader. And this is basically what we're doing. Our journey with Redwood was super interesting. We started working on a new library called Envelope. And this was like the plugin system for GraphQL. And we worked on it for a few months, and we looked for super interesting use cases that we can just try to, I don't know, hijack or use Envelope within. So we really looked for the most promising GraphQL related projects, and then we found Redwood. So this is how the journey with Redwood started. Yeah, exactly. So we started with the Envelope and trying to fit this in. And then we just started a PR, because this is open source, to replace the entire GraphQL infrastructure to use tools from the Guild. It started as something very basic, and today I know that Redwood is using a lot of tools from the Guild, and it's so much fun to collaborate with you all guys. So yeah, recently this is also great because we just had Prisma, and about a year ago, Prisma transferred GraphQL Yoga, which was a great GraphQL server a few years ago, and they transferred it to the Guild, and we started it all over again. We rewrote the entire thing. We're thinking how we can make this thing better from scratch. So this is how the entire thing started, and we basically created a PR for Redwood for using Yoga as the GraphQL server. For us, it was an amazing use case to see how Yoga can act as a GraphQL server in any environment, and how we can use open source to build like small pieces of open source to build great projects and great frameworks. So yeah.
And everything you said is an understatement in my mind. It's like there's so much more story behind that and everything that you do. The best way I try to explain what's happening with our GraphQL API is that there are so many promises of GraphQL, which Redwood is leaning into heavily, that a lot of people, even a majority of people who try GraphQL, walk away disappointed. Because it turns out when you have to configure, when you have to sustain and maintain your own integration, and again, you're working across the stack, front end to back end, all those things get hard and it becomes unmanageable, and then you get disappointed when it turns out things aren't secure. But so what I say, and no one's pushed back on me yet, is that Redwood has the best in class, secure by default, pre-configured sane options from the installation of any framework in existence if you want to use GraphQL. And I
totally agree with that.
And because you guys, now granted, DT, Danny, I mean, there's been tremendous work and the phenomenal collaboration, but really it's the tools that you all brought that made that possible. And so maybe the TLDR is you haven't tried GraphQL until you've tried Redwood's GraphQL, right?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And yeah, it comes with everything that you need, out of the box, and it just works. And everything that you need to do on your GraphQL layer is just, pluggable. You can just put your piece of code and everything just works. Yeah, it's mind blowing.
It is mind blowing. I love, one of my favorite things to do at the end of a presentation. So I'm demoing a bunch of other things, and I've recently been working on some demos just to show the workflow from front end to back end. And at the very end, I install auth And boom, the whole API is now secure by default. And right, like queries are getting denied because I'm not allowed to do that. I'm like, that's, you have no idea how beautiful what just happened is. And then I go in and show the directive, right, in the SDL and make the switch to skip auth. And now I have a public API. It's,
yeah,
oh my
this
gosh.
was my favorite part of our collaboration. Like, we give you some of the basic tools of GraphQL, and you come with great ideas of how you can make it super easy and better for Redwood users. And then we just collaborate and we make it happen. And yeah, users can just enjoy everything we all do together, and I really love it.
I put a talk that I did recently at the GraphQL Galaxy in chat about specifically running through just the GraphQL API backend parts. And I have to say that that is only possible to do a demo like that, to do a talk that short, because of the work that you've done and Envelope, and now using Yoga. Like, it just opens up so many doors and makes it possible for us to demonstrate how to use the framework so easily. And I love that. So thank you for all the work that you've done. And people should know that your team put together a huge amount of work right before this 1.0 release to get Yoga in, which we're like, should we put Yoga in? And I was like, I don't know. We're kind
just put it in.
But you pulled it off, and we did it, and it's done. So thank you so much for all the work that you did and helping us get Yoga into 1.0, and that paves the way for future things for 2.0 even better.
Sure. Thank you for being so open for new tools and experimenting with us on all kinds of new tools. It was fun. And by the way, you mentioned like being able to set up a GraphQL endpoint in a super quick way in only a few lines. And Lauren made us a very quick demo just to show how you can bootstrap just Yoga as is with Envelope. And this is a built-in part with Redwood. So everything you can do with Yoga, you can do with Redwood, and all the plugins are just reusable. So yeah. Lauren, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I will try to share my screen. Oh no.
You should be able to. Are you getting
Yeah,
the
but I
permissions?
don't think I can do it without restarting.
No, Tom, are you on a Mac?
Yeah, try not restarting and see if it'll let you do it, because it might.
Oh my God, it works.
I learned this yesterday. You don't have to do what your computer tells you to do, it turns out.
So can you see my code editor?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, nice. So I basically, before this meeting, or like before this session, I in 10 minutes I prepared this example for us. So just want to showcase like few things of Yoga and how it can help people just using Yoga, but also everything I'm showing right now is also directly applicable to your next Redwood JS setup within seconds. So very simple GraphQL server. We have our query root type, which just has one field. And then we also have our resolver, which just returns like a list of greetings. So if we're going over to the included GraphQL that ships with Yoga, we have a playground, we can execute our operations. So for getting started, that's enough. But let's say we want to do something like rate limiting, because that's something you will need at some point if you have like a lot of traffic and you have malicious actor that want to DDoS you or something like that. Then with Yoga, you can just enable this plugin. Like here in your identity function, you would use the actual IP. I'm not using that right now, just some dummy IP. And then if we are now spamming, nothing happens. Why? Because we did not enable the rate limiting yet. So we enable the plugin, we add our directive, we say, okay, 5 seconds, maximum of 3 calls allowed, otherwise you will get an error message. We save that, so restart. And then if we now spam, we get our error. That's 10 lines of code maximum. So the next thing that you want to do, and which is like a very hard problem in general, is caching, right? So
No, these are all hard problems. I need to say that these are all very hard problems, which are this is the thing. GraphQL has a lot of promises. People try to implement this. There's not really a standard or convention. It gets hard, and they're like, it's GraphQL. It's terrible. But not anymore. All right, keep going. That was amazing.
So yeah, response cache, like you see those sorts of like GraphCDN popping up, and they're basically doing GraphQL caching as a software service product. But like as a we as the guild think stuff like this should be like open source, and everyone should be able to use it and be able to see how it actually works, for whether it's for educational purposes or for actually like using it in production, because I don't know, the service you want to use is too expensive for yourself, right? So with the response cache plugin, basically what you do, you put it here, you set a TTL for a GraphQL operation, and then this we just do for demo purpose to show that stuff is actually served on the cache. So what this configuration now will do is basically for every operation we're executing, the result will be cached for 1 second. So if we execute it multiple times, we can see that the hit is true. And then if I wait longer than 1 second and execute it again, we don't hit the cache. And obviously this is like fully configurable. Like you could do TTL per schema coordinate, and we could say, for example, the query.greetings field is actually cached forever. Let's say infinity. Oh, missing some parentheses here. And then what happens now is that actually it is now cached forever. So maybe you don't want to cache stuff forever, but it's possible if you want to. And then one of the last things I want to showcase is actually like real time is a super hard problem, right? Because how do we get the data to the client? It's always hard. And then how do you do it at scale? We actually built an abstraction that allows making any query operation automatically a live query operation. And for showcasing this, I would just disable the response cache for now. And then let's just modify the greetings array. So this basically, it runs, let's reduce this to 500 milliseconds. So every 500 milliseconds, we take the first item and put it behind the last item. So if we now execute the query, you can see that the items within the greetings array are switching positions, right? So obviously we don't want to spam the server and always like say, hey, I need the latest data, send it to me. So what we want instead is that the server pushes the live updates as they occur to us, right? So for this, we have the use live query plugin. So basically what we have is a live query store, and it keeps tracks of all the fields. And then what we can do after we modified any data source, we can just invalidate the GraphQL field. And then the GraphQL server will actually take care of pushing the updates to us as they are invalidated. So we just put in our use live query here. And then we can just add the add live directive here. And here I must say, unfortunately, there's a bug in the graphical yoga. Currently, live subscription can't be delivered on the front end. But obviously, since it's done via HTTP and we don't need any complex like WebSocket setup, I will just like use this curl command. It would just set the headers to an event stream. Then we have our URL, and within the URL, there's just like the encoded query operation. And let's go here. So now if we run this, you can see every time the thing changes, the new update is pushed. And just for demonstration purposes, let's increase it a bit. Let's make it like 3 seconds. and run it again. And now you can see it updates like every 3 seconds. Every time it updates, we get the update from the server. Yeah. And those are like 3 super powerful things. And they're basically available for plugins as plugins for Yoga. And you can use them with Redwood today. Like you can immediately plug them in. Yeah, that's it.
I don't know what to say. It's so easy. No, it's insanely difficult. That is crazy. I knew the live query stuff was coming, but all right. I felt a little bit reluctant to get that Yoga PR in right there at the end. But man, I knew it was going to be worth it. And now it is. That's crazy. And so again, live query, that is the answer to subscriptions for years now. I mean, not quite, right? But that could be an option, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's the real-time option, because people are asking, they say, can I do subscriptions? But what they're asking for is like, what are the server real-time capabilities?
Exactly. And then you can use based on your use case.
Yeah, 99% of like subscriptions use cases that I saw are basically just live queries, because they just want to have the latest data on the front end. So probably live queries are the solution for a majority of people, right?
Right. Yeah, understood. Yeah, thank you. Not the same thing, but that's what the use case is what people want is real time or a real time equivalent. So that's amazing.
Now we just have to tell people about it.
Now which seems to be our Achilles heel, but we're getting better at that part. And
There's so much to tell.
I know, it's so hard. So Rob, a question I had for you was just, you talked yesterday in your demo of AlgoStake, just about the performance you're getting from the server and the API. And it turns out it's performant. You were talking more about the infrastructure itself, but it turns out the Redwood API, which is running on Yoga now, works pretty well.
Yeah, like I was saying, the majority of requests are like 50 milliseconds, as long as it's not a ton of like a really complex SQL query, like my basic queries. So 50 milliseconds is like the minimum, and that's going across the country. I think it's in on the East Coast and coming back. It's amazing. I love it.
I'm not sure if you need to do better than 50 milliseconds, really. Like I feel like that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I remember like years and years ago, it used to be 250 milliseconds was like our baseline for performant field. This was like 15 years ago. And that's like a fifth of that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff I'm seeing now, like I'm doing a lot of polling right now. I can get rid of all that polling if I had the live stuff. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it turns on there's like 2 lines of code and then it all just is on. Now, how about you're not doing caching yet. So how does describe for me in the data request, right? So database, server, like in client, where's caching living inside of like that chain of events, the caching that you just showed us?
So basically where it happens right now is in between. So if you have GraphQL, you have 3 phases. The first one is parsing, where you pass the GraphQL payload, then it's validated. And then afterwards, there's the execution. And right now, the caching is happening before the execution, because there we have all the payloads, and then we can skip the execution phase if we know that something is already in the cache. But actually, we want to move that phase even further in front of parsing and validating, because then it could be even faster. Like Yoga by default already caches parsing and validation for already reoccurring operations. But like by putting the caching or the response caching at the front of everything, we can get the best performance that's possible. And also like the response caching I showed is based on in memory right now, but we also have like one store that is caching for Redis. So if you have like AWS Lambda setup or Cloudflare workers or whatever, which we also want to see Redwood being deployed to in the future, like that would be awesome. Then you can rely on Redis, which is then a shared external cache. So yeah, like this is just the beginning. There's still a lot more we can collaborate on and we can improve on, right?
So you're saying my cache could live on the edge. I hear the edge is hot right
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like we already like tested a bit with using the Cloudflare worker storage stores. I forgot the name, sorry.
Yeah, it's KB.
Yeah, we didn't spend too much time in researching this because like Redis is already very good for the use cases we are having. But if we want to go like full out, we can definitely make it work, right?
So Rob, in case your 50 milliseconds is too long, seems like maybe you can improve that a little bit.
I always want to be faster if I can. Yeah, that'd be great. I have a question. So we're still using Apollo client. Will Apollo client have any idea about how the subscription, that event stream works? Or we need to change our client out?
Yeah, basically the main reason why we decided against using WebSockets and use server-side events for not server-side events, server-side events or event streams is basically that you have minimal protocol overhead, and like everyone, as I showed with the curl comment, can just basically query it without doing any complex stuff. So in terms of how you do it with Apollo client, you would have to set up your own link, which we also have recipes for in the Yoga documentation. And then you just use the in the browser the window.event source object for like initiating an SSE stream, and that's it. Like it's pretty straightforward. Actually, it's way easier than WebSockets. Like it's also debatable, like WebSockets also have their advantages and disadvantages compared to event streams. But yeah, for most use cases, SSE is probably a lot simpler to adopt.
Yeah, mainly because you're just using the same HTTP protocol as is. You don't need any new TCP connection or a long-living connection that runs behind the scenes, and it's way more friendly, for example, for mobile apps. Right, so you can use SSE not just to simplify your setup, but also to improve the performance and the way that your app works. So yeah.
That sounds great. We need documentation on the Redwood side. I'm thinking out loud here, but just on how to do real time with Redwood, right? But again, what people want is a feature to deliver to their end users. That's what they really want. But we've all been trained to go and ask for certain things, like, do you support WebSockets? Do you support subscriptions, right? Because that's the terminology but we're really talking about the feature that we want. And WebSockets has its own ups and downs. I know from the very beginning, people were asking, do you support WebSockets? Can you do subscriptions with Redwood? You have you're using Apollo client, but then it comes down to questions of infrastructure, right? If you're going to go serverless and you're on AWS Lambdas and you need to be using the API gateway, it turns out people think that the API gateway is terrible with WebSockets and subscriptions. And so maybe then you have to use a third-party service. And so it sounds like we don't have to talk about any of that anymore. And we can just say, do this thing and you get what you want at the end of the day. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that too much of a simplification? Also oversimplification?
Maybe a bit too simple, but pretty close. Like I am actually like I think together we can provide an easy solution for everyone without having to like go bonkers with their infrastructure and solving hard problems. Like that's what I love about Redwood and the guild in general. We try to solve hard problems and give them to everyone like for free. You can't get more awesome than this, right?
He's right here, but I'm going to quote Tom Preston Warner in saying what we want to do is make the oh man, I'm not getting your quote right. Make the easy things simple, make the hard things possible. That's the end.
To be fair, that's not my quote, but it is
that's
a good
not you.
quote.
I thought that was Peter always quotes you.
Make the easy things easy and the hard things possible. I don't know, Rob, is that a Rails thing? I actually don't know where that comes from.
No. Yeah, I don't know where that's originally from.
It was the hard things possible. Yeah. Make the easy things easy. That's what I was forgetting, is also an important part of that, because it turns out you can also make the easy things really hard. And that works against you in the end. Gentlemen, thank you. Thanks for going way over time on this. I intentionally put you at the end because I wanted to go over time. I just didn't tell anyone that at the front. I knew that there'd be a lot to talk about, and you delivered. Thank you. We're missing like 10 other people from the guild that were interested in coming and showing up, but to all of you, it's just been a pleasure. You've leveled us up as a team, right? The best of collaboration. We've taken risks together. We've learned a tremendous amount from you, and you tell us that you've also learned from us, although I'm not sure what, because we're just honored to get to work with you all. And definitely want more demos at future public meetups. We just want to see more. So anything we can do to help you, how do we help the guild? You all are a ragtag band of decentralized open sourcers. How do we continue to support and help you as a community?
So spread the word, we are doing open source. So use our tools, share feedback. That's all we need. And by the way, with Yoga, we launched a new GraphQL with Yoga and Prisma and the rest of this great ecosystem. We launched a new tutorial with all of these tools. So if you want to learn more about GraphQL, so go to GraphQL Yoga. And if you're already using GraphQL and you're looking for a schema registry and the tool to manage all your GraphQL workflows, we as the guild are working on a tool called Hive that simplifies all of that in a very nice tool. So yeah, feel free to sign up for the alpha.
Yeah, would you post a link to that? I know a lot of people would love to do that. The guild also does a lot of consulting and client work. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I think I knew it was going to happen, and it started a little bit as a trickle, but 1.0 for Redwood is going to, some consultancies and firms are starting to kind of pop up and say, oh, okay, now it's time to talk. And so we might have some people to send your way. Because what do I know about GraphQL? I don't know. I just want it to work. I just want it to work. Thank you all. Tom, Rob, anything else as we sign off here? Thanks for sticking around for overtime.
Oh, thanks guys for working on this. Writing a bunch of GraphQL servers and stuff is not really what we as of Redwood are trying to do, right? It's been great to be able to assemble these really awesome building blocks, glue them together, integrate, and then build some layers on top to make those easy things easy. And so thank you for helping us get the work done. It's been amazing working with you.
Can only say likewise, like the meetings we had and talked about like stuff and figuring out other stuff, it was just like awesome. And I always felt like in a super good environment, right? Okay.
Open source.
Redwood Conf EU. Okay. I've got one little treat as we go here. I'll see if I can switch my audio back over. I sometimes get, but for everyone who stuck around, there's 29 of you. Thank you. All this is recorded. We'll put it on the YouTube for Redwood, youtube.com/redwoodjs. And we are also, two things, should have started with this. There is another, this was only half of the partners office hours. We have over 25 different organizations, companies, people that we integrate with. We have 16 of them that are joining us today. This was session 1. We're doing a session 2 in the afternoon. I mean, it's just amazing. It just keeps coming. I'm loving this. And tomorrow we have a very special office hours for startups. We're inviting members of the Redwood Startup Club to come and join us. And that will be at 9 a.m. Start time. That's Pacific time. And we have a very special big announcement that we're going to kick things off with, as well as some Rob Cameron treats that should be really fun. We're going to have a really good time. We have a lot to celebrate, and that will be tomorrow. So Rob, do you have any guesses as to what the big announcement might be tomorrow?
We're gonna sponsor an F1 team, right? Is that what we're doing?
There are some members of the core team that would be delighted.
Annie would love me for that.
If Redwood 2.0 was written in Ruby, now that would be a big announcement.
What if Redwood 2.0 came out next week?
All we have to do is like just merge a breaking change, right? And then boom, we're there.
I mean, totally do it.
People
Oh
would
yeah,
be so
Keith's
mad.
Keith's guessing we're going to add some woodworking features.
Oh, so nice.
That'd be nice.
Oh, so fun. We hope to see you all tomorrow.
Yeah, you'll want to be there. I'm gonna
You'll
announce.
want to be there.
It's gonna be great.
Okay, switching over. Let's see if I can do this on our way out. Where are you? I just want to find the screen that I want to share. Okay, there it is. Switching over, and I'm gonna switch my audio. Give me the thumbs up if this works. Almost.
That's a super exciting slide there.
Yeah, let's just get those last couple PRs merged, and I think 1.0 is ready to go. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.
Do it!
Holy cow, what are you doing?
What are you waiting for? Do it!
Look, we got to get this build working or it's just going to fail, and then we got to start over.
If you're tired of starting over, stop giving up.
I'm not giving up. I just have to.
Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams.
I don't even know. I don't even know what that means.
Do it! Make your dreams come true!
Look, we have to get this right. This is like the real production release. It's got to be as good as we can make it.
Nothing is impossible.
I didn't say it was impossible. We just have to.
Yesterday, you said tomorrow. So just do it!
We can't just do it.
Yes, you can! Just do it!
You got some. Yeah, you got it.
Do it!
Oh, it's so good. I can't.
I love the idea, Rob, that you're just like programming, and Shia LaBeouf is like right next to you, and you're just like totally trying to ignore him.
He's just always
like,
there.
wow, he's just like pacing, and you're like, I'm just working here.
That's so good every time. All right, gentlemen, everyone, thank you. We'll see you this afternoon if you're joining us then. And to everyone, every partner, every contributor, everyone around the world that made Redwood 1.0 what it is today, our deepest gratitude. It's really been a pleasure. And also a lot more to come. Turns out we're just getting started. Is that what they say? That's what they say. All right, we'll catch you this afternoon. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.